Have you ever wondered how far someone would go, how deeply they'd betray a system meant to save lives just to make a little extra money? It's a question I never thought I'd have to ask. Not as a professional, not as a human being. My name is Luis Ramírez. For nearly a decade, I've worked in critical IT infrastructure for healthcare systems. What that means in simple terms is this: I'm the guy who keeps machines alive so they can keep patients alive. But nothing prepared me for the moment I found out the very servers meant to run diagnostic AI's tools hospitals use to detect strokes, sepsis, or cardiac failure were being secretly hijacked to mine cryptocurrency. Not by hackers, by someone inside, someone who should have been protecting those systems, someone in charge. This isn't just a story about technology. It's about morality, about how people use power when they think no one's watching, and about what happens when someone like me decides not to look away. If this kind of story matters to you, truth, integrity, justice, I invite you to stay with me until the end. And if you feel something along the way, don't just watch, like, comment, or subscribe. Because stories like this, they deserve to be heard. I wasn't always in this line of work. I didn't grow up dreaming about server racks or cybersecurity protocols. But sometimes the world gives you a reason to care. When I was 24, my younger sister Mariana went into cardiac arrest at a small rural hospital in El Paso. The crash cart arrived late. The diagnostic system froze mid-scan. It took them too long to recognize what was happening. She survived, but she never fully recovered. A few extra seconds would have changed everything. That's when I understood something most people don't. In healthcare, every millisecond matters. Behind every machine that beeps or screen that lights up, there's an unseen network holding everything together. And if that system fails, people suffer. That's why I became an infrastructure guy. Not the kind who brags at conferences. The kind who quietly shows up at 2:00 a.m. to make sure no nurse ever has to say the system's down when it matters most. For the past 3 years, I've worked at Horizon Tech Medical Systems in Dallas. We're not a hospital. We're the backbone. Our AI models support over 100 emergency rooms across the country. When a patient walks in with a headache, our cloud-based neural network analyzes CT scans in real time and flags early signs of stroke. Our servers prioritize life-critical inference tasks. We don't sell pills or devices. We sell time. And in medicine, time saves lives. I lead the back-end systems team. I make sure the clusters stay stable, the inference engines are optimized, and the security protocols hold up under pressure. I work in silence like most people in ops do. No one notices us until something breaks. But that's the point, isn't it? If I'm doing my job right, no one knows I exist. And that was fine with me. I didn't need recognition. I needed to know that I was preventing what happened to Mariana from happening to someone else's little sister. Then they hired Brent Calloway, the new CTO, young sharp-suit crypto startup background full of disruption talk. We're not just a medical company. He'd say, we're a data company. Every time he opened his mouth, it sounded like a pitch deck. At first, I didn't mind. I've seen plenty of tech guys come and go. But Brent wasn't like the others. He didn't just want to modernize the company. He wanted root access to our critical systems admin privileges over clusters designed to prioritize emergency diagnostics. He said it was about streamlining compute allocation. But the more I watched him, the more I realized something wasn't right. And one day I noticed our GPU loads spiking in the middle of the night when no one was supposed to be using them. That's when I knew something was happening beneath the surface. And it was my job to find out what. It started with a pattern, just a subtle one. On a Thursday morning, I was running our weekly cluster health report when I saw something odd, a spike in GPU usage at 3:12 a.m. on our Tier 1 inference stack. That particular stack was reserved for real-time diagnostic AI stroke detection, sepsis, prediction, emergency triage support. At 3 a.m., there shouldn't be any traffic unless there's a trauma event surge somewhere. But the hospital logs showed nothing unusual. I dug deeper. The next night, same time, same spike. It happened again 2 days later, then on a Sunday, not just one node, but across multiple clusters. It looked like compute was being quietly siphoned, like someone had set up an invisible pipeline tapping into the system when no one was watching. I checked scheduled jobs. Nothing. Maintenance? None logged. Then I pulled access logs, and there it was. Brent Calloway's admin account logged into the system console at 2:57 a.m., launching containers into our diagnostic sandbox environment. The sandbox was a tightly monitored space meant for testing new medical inference models under strict supervision, and Brent was using it after hours alone, unscheduled. No review, no documentation. I called him the next day under the pretense of discussing anomalous load behaviors. He didn't flinch, just leaned back in his chair, gave me that tech bro smirk, and said, "We're running some experimental model iterations, neural pruning tests, GPU heavy, but completely harmless." It wasn't convincing. I spoke to Sophia in compliance. She told me she hadn't approved any such tests. Then Ethan from DevOps mentioned he'd seen a few mysterious containers labeled Revenue Sandbox 01, but didn't think anything of it, figured it was internal benchmarking. The more I looked, the more patterns unraveled. Accesses during holidays, weekends between 2:00 and 4:00 a.m. every time. The system wasn't just under strain, it was being hijacked. It didn't crash, but it slowed. Just enough to delay response times by fractions of a second. In a hospital, a fraction of a second isn't just technical, it's clinical. It can mean the difference between early intervention and an irreversible outcome. Brent began pushing strange requests to our team. He asked for direct firewall access to specific nodes. When I asked why, he replied, "We're exploring edge compute efficiencies." When I said that kind of access violated our medical compliance protocols, he looked at me like I was slow. "Luis, don't think like a hospital guy. Think like a technologist." That's when it hit me. Brent didn't care about the ethics. He didn't care about patient safety or diagnostic integrity. He saw Horizon Tech not as a healthcare system, but as a high-performance GPU farm. What I didn't understand yet was the scale. I thought I was dealing with misuse of resources, reckless, maybe even negligent. I hadn't realized just how deliberate it all was. Then, on the following Monday, I found something in the system logs that made my stomach drop. A container had run for 4 hours straight on our primary stroke detection cluster, labeled only as Batch Miner 12. Inside the config file, a line pointing to an external Ethereum wallet address. I copied the wallet ID and ran a basic blockchain lookup. Over $14,000 had been transferred from that wallet in just the past 2 weeks. And that was just one. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Brent wasn't testing anything. He was mining crypto on the same servers hospitals used to diagnose strokes. I knew I had to be careful. Accusing the CTO of crypto mining on medical infrastructure isn't something you drop over coffee in the break room. Especially not someone like Brent Calloway, charming, untouchable, and dangerously persuasive. The board loved his vision. Half the execs called him a genius. But geniuses don't hijack life-saving systems to generate Ethereum in the middle of the night. I went back into the system this time with surgical precision. I isolated the containers labeled Batch Miner, then compared their memory patterns and file structures against legitimate diagnostic models. It was all disguised to look like benchmarking tools. Even the executable names mimicked internal AI processes, things like Stroke Predict Batch 3 or MedNet Latency Scan. But inside those containers, shell scripts, wallet links, mining pool URLs routed through anonymized proxies. This wasn't some sloppy side hustle, it was engineered. Someone had spent real time masking this operation. And Brent wasn't just stealing power from a general server. He was tapping into high-performance medically optimized GPUs, the kind used for real-time diagnosis during trauma intake. He'd embedded his mining software directly into the sandboxed environments, knowing that traffic would be harder to track there, blending in with actual inference jobs. I traced the mining wallets, multiple addresses, all recently created, transfers happening every few days. I tracked one wallet through an exchange and found it had been cashed out into a holding company registered in Belize. The money wasn't just sitting idle, it was being moved. Still, I needed more. I started comparing system logs with hospital access times. That's when things got dark. In 3 separate hospitals during peak ER activity, Brent's mining scripts were running. Diagnostic AI that should have been flagging strokes and embolisms in real time were delayed. Not crashed, just slowed. Lagged by 4 seconds here, 7 seconds there. At first glance, it looked like network congestion or infrastructure fatigue. But under the hood, the cause was clear. Those precious seconds were being used to calculate cryptographic hashes. That night, I printed out every log I had. Code samples, GPU heat maps, mining timestamps overlaid on ER diagnostics, wallet histories. It was a full autopsy of the crime. The next morning, I walked into Brent's office. He didn't look surprised. He leaned back like he was expecting me. Smiled. "What's up, Luis?" I placed the folder on his desk. "You're using hospital-grade AI servers for crypto mining." He opened the folder, casually flipped through the first few pages, then let it drop shut. "You think too small," he said. "Excuse me. This isn't about mining, it's about innovation." Alternative revenue streams. Hospitals are broke. Do you know how much AI infrastructure sits idle? After hours, I'm optimizing it. By delaying stroke detection systems, negligible impact. I've run the models. We're talking milliseconds. You've run calculations. On acceptable risk to patient safety. He smiled wider. "Luis, this is how real tech moves forward. Disruption always looks like treason to the old guard." I stood there for a second, heart pounding, not with fear, something colder, something settled. I nodded. Understood. Then I turned, walked out of his office, and began planning how to take him down. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just lay there in the dark thinking through every possibility. I wasn't scared, not yet. But I was calculating. Brent was smart, and worse, he was confident. The kind of man who had already anticipated being caught and planned for it. I knew one thing: if I wanted this to hold up, I couldn't just save a few screenshots and hope for the best. I needed undeniable time-stamped proof. So I went back into the system and did what I do best: trace everything. By 2 December a.m., I had archived full access logs, internal timestamps, SHA-256 hashes of the modified containers, snapshots of memory usage, and node performance logs during active hospital hours. I pulled the metadata wallet addresses, even the compiler signatures. I exported everything into 3 encrypted drives, one on the cloud, one on a USB, hidden behind the breaker panel in my garage, and one physical drive I mailed to my cousin in San Diego with no return address. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being methodical. When I arrived at Horizon Tech the next morning, something was off. The front desk security guard, Terry, who usually smiled and waved, didn't make eye contact. As I swiped my badge, the panel flashed red. Access denied. "Probably a glitch," Terry muttered, but he looked nervous. "Can you wait over there for a sec?" 10 minutes later, a woman from HR came down with a security escort. Her name was Dana. I'd never seen her before. "Luis, we need to speak with you." In a sterile meeting room on the 2nd floor, she laid out the paperwork: immediate termination, breach of internal data systems, unauthorized access to protected environments, violation of administrative protocol. I read it in silence. Every accusation was technical. Every word had a legal double meaning. Yes, I'd accessed restricted containers. Yes, I'd examined the sandbox. Yes, I'd pulled transaction logs. But all of that was my job. My official title was Senior Systems Infrastructure Lead. My responsibilities explicitly included monitoring unauthorized resource usage, detecting anomalies, and maintaining compliance. I was investigating an internal security breach, I said. A deliberate one. Mr. Calloway believes you've overstepped your scope, she replied, eyes flicking away. We're required to act immediately to protect the integrity of our systems. She didn't mention the crypto wallets. She didn't ask for my evidence. Brent had gotten ahead of me. He'd painted me as a rogue admin, poking around where I didn't belong, violating protocol. And without any context, without anyone brave enough to challenge him, it was a clean narrative. I signed the termination papers, handed over my access card, left my badge and office keys on the table. Then I walked out of the building, stepped into my car, and sat in the parking lot. Not angry. Not yet. Just quiet. Brent thought he'd solved the problem by firing me. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly calculate, is that I'd already moved the evidence into place. And now the clock had started ticking. That afternoon I went home and closed the blinds, not out of fear, out of focus. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began assembling everything into a formal report. Every log, every diagram, every screenshot was inserted into a clear timeline from the first spike to the last recorded mining job. I added context what each GPU cluster was used for, how the delays aligned with peak ER hours, and how the mining software had been disguised. I wasn't writing a tech report. I was preparing a legal brief. It took me 5 hours. When I finished, I sent it through the official reporting portal of the Office of Inspector General at the Department of Health and Human Services. I included a short note. This is not a theoretical risk. This directly affects patient outcomes across multiple hospitals using Horizon Tech diagnostic systems. I am willing to testify. I didn't expect a fast response. Government cases usually take weeks to process. But they called me the next morning. The voice on the other end was calm but direct. Mr. Ramírez, this is Special Agent Renee Walker with the Office of Inspector General. We've reviewed your submission regarding unauthorized crypto mining on critical healthcare infrastructure. We need to meet today by 2 p.m. I was in a conference room at a federal building downtown, sitting across from Agent Walker and 2 forensic analysts from the Health Tech Crimes Division. The room was plain, no windows, no laptops, just legal pads and eyes that didn't blink much. They let me speak. I walked them through the evidence step by step. At the end, I pulled out one of the physical backup drives and slid it across the table. I believe there's more hidden in Horizon Tech systems. My access was revoked before I could retrieve it all. Walker nodded, then said 6 words that changed everything. We need you to walk us in. I blinked. Back into the building, she nodded. You'll be escorted. We'll get a federal warrant by morning. But we need your help identifying the infrastructure. Your knowledge of their system is specific. Of course, I said. Less than 24 hours after being fired, I was being invited back in, but this time as a federal witness. The next day, 3 black government SUVs pulled up outside my apartment. I stepped into the back seat with a folder on my lap, and one purpose in my head: make sure the truth doesn't get buried. When we pulled into Horizon Tech's lot, the sun was just starting to break through the clouds. It was strange being back, like revisiting a crime scene, because that's what it was now, a digital crime scene with real-world consequences. Brent didn't know I was coming. Not yet. But in a few minutes he'd learned that firing me didn't erase the evidence. And the federal government wasn't interested in office politics. They were interested in justice. We stepped through the sliding glass doors of Horizon Tech just after 9 a.m. I hadn't even made it to the front desk when Brent spotted me. He was crossing the lobby mid-conversation with 2 junior developers when his eyes landed on me and the 3 federal agents at my side. He froze. For a moment, his face was blank. Then his mouth opened slightly, just enough to say, "What is this Agent Walker didn't slow down? She pulled out her badge with smooth efficiency. Renee Walker, Office of Inspector General. We have a federal warrant for full access to your system's premises and personnel records. This is ridiculous, Brent snapped. Luis doesn't even work here anymore. He was terminated for breaching protocol. He's not authorized. He's here as a federal witness in an active healthcare investigation, Walker cut in. And as of this morning, your CTO credentials are temporarily suspended under federal order. The lobby had gone silent. Employees looked up from their phone screens and morning coffees. Brent turned red, not with embarrassment, but with rage. But rage doesn't mean much when the government's involved. He was powerless, and he knew it. We moved quickly. I guided the forensic team to the server room on the 5th floor, the brain of Horizon Tech's AI operations. I still remembered every wire, every port, every alias Brent had tried to disguise. Agent Walker's specialist, a quiet woman named Lee, plugged in a secure laptop and began pulling data. The system's security shell resisted for maybe 30 seconds, then cracked open. What we found went even deeper than I expected. There weren't just 1 or 2 wallets. There were 11, all active, all receiving ETH payouts on a weekly cycle. Some of the containers had been cleverly hidden behind Docker aliases named after FDA-approved medical software. One script had been buried 3 layers deep under a file labeled Chach Backup Health Box Legacy Model, with internal dependencies renamed to mimic neural net optimizers. But Lee was good. She unpacked it all with clinical speed. There she said, pointing at her screen, time-stamped peak activity on March 2nd. Full utilization on nodes 3 through 7. Diagnostic queue latency increased by 38% during this window. She clicked again. This matches Horizon's AI downtime log from Memorial Hospital in Denver. Patient scans were delayed for over 12 minutes that night. ER team reported imaging system lag but couldn't identify root cause. Brent had diverted GPU power from critical medical inference in the middle of live diagnostics. I watched as Agent Walker's expression shifted from professional concern to something closer to fury. She turned to Brent, who had been brought in under observation. Were you aware your scripts were causing delays in emergency triage systems? There's no evidence any patients were harmed, Brent said quickly. That's not what I asked. He tried to speak again, but stumbled. For the first time since I'd met him, Brent Calloway looked genuinely afraid. The feds weren't theorizing anymore. They were proving it line by line, log by log, second by second. And there, in the middle of his polished empire, Brent realized what I had known from the moment I walked out of his office. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. But he'd finally met the one thing he couldn't manipulate the truth, backed by federal code. The forensic team spent the next 6 hours combing through Horizon Tech's infrastructure. At first, I stayed quiet, standing to the side, and letting them do their job. But as they uncovered more, Agent Walker began pulling me into every room. Because what we were finding wasn't just unethical, it was catastrophic. The mining operation had affected all 4 of Horizon Tech's primary diagnostic clusters, each of which supported dozens of hospitals nationwide. The log showed consistent GPU throttling during high-traffic hours, especially in facilities with older infrastructure that couldn't fall back on local processing. These hospitals had relied entirely on our AI backend to detect time-sensitive conditions like aneurysms, pulmonary embolisms, and sepsis. And those systems, those life-saving models, had been deliberately slowed so Brent could make cryptocurrency. Lee, the forensic analyst, turned her screen toward me. Here's something she said. On April 18th, diagnostic response time spiked to 42 seconds in a Kansas ER. That's a stroke alert delay. She pulled up the correlated hospital incident report. A 63-year-old woman had collapsed at home and arrived at the ER with signs of confusion and slurred speech. The AI system flagged the CT scan for stroke, but not until it was too late. Manual review caught it eventually, but by then the window for administering clot-busting medication had closed. She survived, Lee said softly, but with permanent paralysis. Another case surfaced from May 5th, this time in a pediatric hospital in Arizona. A 7-year-old boy had presented with symptoms of meningitis. The Horizon Tech AI was supposed to flag cerebrospinal abnormalities within 2 minutes of scan upload. Instead, it took 9. By the time doctors manually intervened, the child was already in septic shock. He lived, but barely. We kept going. April 27th, a diagnostic tool for detecting aortic dissection failed to trigger in time. May 13th, emergency alerts were delayed during a cardiac trauma case. In every situation, Brent's mining software had been quietly running in the background, burning up GPU cycles that should have been detecting life-threatening conditions. He hadn't just delayed machines. He had endangered people. And the worst part, he knew. We uncovered email threads between Brent and a private consultant in Singapore. In one message, dated 3 weeks before I confronted him, Brent wrote, "Need to optimize hash performance without triggering latency flags. Current GPU drain is slowing model response. Risk tolerance, somewhere, 8's max delay." He'd literally quantified how much patient risk was acceptable in exchange for faster crypto payouts. In another email, he asked whether brief diagnostic slowdowns during non-surgical hours could be masked by expected model error margins. It wasn't negligence. It was calculation. It was deliberate. By late afternoon, the full picture had formed. Over $90,000 in mined Ethereum across multiple wallets, 11 disguised containers, at least 9 patient cases directly affected by AI delays, and dozens more under suspicion. Brent had presented himself as an innovator, a genius optimizing unused infrastructure. But in truth, he was just another fraud one who wore the language of progress like armor to hide his greed. And now that armor was cracked. Agent Walker turned to me. Her voice was low-controlled. "We'll need you for testimony. This is going to escalate." Fast. I nodded. I had no doubt. Because once the government saw this, once hospital administrators realized what had been risked for crypto profits, this wouldn't be a tech scandal. It would be a national case study in betrayal. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Within 6 weeks, Brent Calloway was indicted on 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of healthcare endangerment, and 2 counts of criminal conspiracy involving federal medical infrastructure. The Department of Justice made it clear from the start they intended to make an example out of him. I was called to testify on the 3rd day of hearings. The courtroom was packed press hospital lawyers, cybersecurity experts, even a few former Horizon Tech employees who'd quietly resigned after the scandal broke. The moment I took the stand, I could feel Brent's eyes on me. Cold, calculating, but no longer confident. The prosecutors were surgical. They walked the jury through every layer of deception, from the hidden containers to the falsified labels from the wallet payouts to the email where Brent calculated acceptable latency thresholds during live diagnostics. They showed GPU lag graphs synchronized with ER emergency logs. They brought in a trauma surgeon from Denver who testified that the AI delay had forced his team to rely on outdated manual methods in a high-pressure stroke case. Then came the damning evidence, the message Brent had sent weeks before: "I was fired." Ramírez is getting suspicious. If he digs further, we may need to frame his access as a security breach before the logs are traced. He'd not only planned the crypto mining, he'd planned my removal. By the end of the 3rd day, the jury didn't need a 4th. They deliberated for just under 2 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Brent sat motionless as the judge read the sentence: 9 years in federal prison, 5 years supervised release and restitution of over $400,000 in fraud damages, including reimbursement to every hospital whose diagnostic systems had been compromised. As the bailiff cuffed him and let him out, he turned one last time. I didn't look away. I didn't nod. I just watched him go like someone closing the last corrupted process on a machine finally clean. The aftermath was intense. Congressional hearings were held on AI oversight in healthcare. Horizon Tech's board was dissolved. A class action lawsuit was filed by patients and their families. And the company I'd once quietly served from a dark corner of the server room called me back, not to apologize, but to offer me a new role: Director of Cyber Integrity. My job was no longer just maintaining systems. It was defending them, auditing every layer of Horizon Tech's infrastructure training staff, redesigning fail-safes, and ensuring nothing like Brent's scheme could ever happen again. But it didn't stop there. Soon other hospitals began calling, then state health departments, then international partners. Within 4 months, I was consulting across 3 continents, leading a movement to build smarter, safer, and more ethically protected AI systems for hospitals worldwide. Brent had tried to silence me, but in doing so, he gave me something far louder than revenge. He gave me purpose. These days, my job looks different. I no longer sit in the dark reacting to system failures. I build structures to prevent them. The systems we designed after the investigation can now detect unauthorized GPU usage within seconds. Every node is monitored in real time, every anomaly flagged before it can do harm. The very clusters Brent once exploited are now protected by layers of security even he couldn't have bypassed. But more than firewalls and code, what changed was mindset. Because real innovation doesn't come from exploiting what's broken. It comes from protecting what matters. You can call it ethics, or responsibility, or just doing your damn job when it counts. Whatever name you give it, that's the kind of innovation people actually need. I don't talk about Brent much anymore. The system dealt with him. The justice was served. But when I walk through a hospital and hear the machines humming without delay, when I see a doctor glance at a screen and act within seconds, that's when I remember why I stayed. Not to get even, but to make sure no one else had to pay the price of someone else's greed. If this story moved, you let it stay with you. Leave a comment like, "This kind of story hits harder than any headline, and if you want more stories that matter, you know what to do. Stay connected, because sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who make the biggest difference."